I'm Katie Warner. I'm the director here at Audubon Center for Birds of Prey, and welcome to our Friday evening event. It is so fun to see all the names that are logging into our system tonight. We have people from all over Florida, some out west, some from Pennsylvania, some from California, and that is an exciting evening ahead of us. Welcome to Wind Beneath Our Wings. If this is your first event, we're so excited you're here with us. We have had 2 days of activities that have included Raptor Happy Hour, where we got to play games, Raptor Trivia, Let's Make a Deal. It was so fun. We got to meet some of our feathered friends. And then today we took a sneak peek inside our Raptor Trauma Clinic, learned a little bit more about what we do with the birds that are injured that arrive at our doors needing help. So tonight we are very excited for Dr. Paul Gray to join us as our keynote speaker. If you've never met or heard Paul before, you're in for a super big surprise and treat as he shares about his work helping the Florida Everglades. He's going to tell us a little bit about raptors and restoration and what birds are telling us. Wind Beneath Our Wings is the Center's annual fundraising event. So tonight is going to be fun, but we want you to dig deep, get out your wallets, get out your credit card, and help us raise some money. We are trying to raise $90,000 during Wind Beneath Our Wings to directly support programs. Programs at the center include our clinical and rehabilitation programs, where we treat over 700 injured and orphaned birds that arrive at our facility. Our Audubon Eagle Watch program, which you learned a little bit about during the video. We have volunteers all over Florida monitoring our bald eagles and helping protect important habitat and collect data on productivity. We have our conservation education programs, where we get to welcome people to the center in person and go out into the community and educate school kids and adults about the importance of raptors, the role they play in the environment, and how you can help. And we also have a program called CLI, our Conservation Leadership Initiative, and I certainly hope some of those students have tuned in tonight. If you haven't heard, we have a match also for fundraising tonight. Due to our generous donors and our advisory board members, we have $10,000 for you to help us match to raise money. Thank you so much to Scott Taylor and Ann Harwood Nuss for offering up this match. We will drop the links to donate in the chat, and so you can easily get to where you need to go to make a contribution. We're halfway there as of tonight, so help us get over that edge. Help us widen our wingspan from where we are now to the full extent, including $90,000 at the end of tonight. So know that your gifts will directly support our programs, and we really appreciate it. Also, it is our last call for the auction. We have a fun auction going on, offering up many experiences and tickets to theme parks, art events, artwork, and we invite you to get on and play with your friends, compete against each other, raise some money, and get some items that you'd like. Some of these adventures include a trip to our other sanctuary called Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, where you can go out on a buggy tour. And you'll hear a little bit more tonight. You can win a trip with Paul Gray on Lake Okeechobee. The center is offering up some great experience, including bird releases, eagle releases, and an opportunity to name one of our newest education ambassadors, a snail kite. Let's take a look.
This is a female snail kite. No, not like that. Snail kites are an endangered species of raptor that are found in Florida closer to the Everglades. They're really rare for us to admit into the Raptor Trauma Clinic. So rare that we've only gotten 2 snail kite patients in the last decade. Like their name suggests, they do eat snails. Back to this particular female. She needs your help. She was rescued here at the center after running into an airboat, injuring her wing. And now, as a permanent resident to our center, she's gonna need a name. That's where you come in. Bid and bid again in order to be the one that has naming rights of this beautiful snail kite. you can find her in the kite enclosure with other species of kites. Being totally non-flighted, she's usually found at the bottom of the enclosure. But let me tell you, she loves to eat, and she's also pretty smart. Just look how she's being trained to step on the scale when she's asked.
Good.
So get ready to bid and name this snail kite.
How cool would it be to be able to name an endangered species? So we're looking for someone to bid high and get that opportunity. We can't wait. I'd like to thank our sponsors who make this event possible. Wind Beneath Our Wings is always lucky to have such wonderful corporations and individuals involved with our work. We have two bald eagle sponsors, our friends at SeaWorld Orlando and our friends at Disney. They are wonderful partners in our community, not only to give their monetary donations, but also they have many of their employees that volunteer their time with us. So let's hear from one.
They thrill us. Make us laugh. And make us cry. They make us think.
She's beautiful.
Inspire us. And teach us. Most importantly, they connect us to the world of nature. And right now, more than ever, they need us.
Through our efforts here at the park at Disney's Animal Kingdom to share the stories and our efforts in the field to truly make a difference scientifically in the community and with the animals themselves, our end goal is that we truly make a difference for those animals in the wild.
The Disney Conservation Fund is proud to celebrate and protect the wildlife we share our planet with. From our experiences and dedication to animal care, to our work to save wildlife and our support of conservation heroes, the Disney Conservation Fund is committed to ensuring a world where wildlife thrives and inspiring all of us to treasure and protect the magic of nature.
We blend the love of nature and a respect for animals that Walt Disney always had himself with making dreams come true, getting people excited about nature and about being out in the wild.
Every single one of us matters and has a role to play. Every single day we make a difference. Let's learn to live in peace and harmony between nations, cultures, religions, and between us and Mother Nature.
At Disney, we're not just talking about helping the animals that share our planet, we're doing something about it. Join us by taking action in your own community to save wildlife, inspire action, and protect the planet.
Again, we appreciate so much our sponsors that help us with Wind Beneath Our Wings. We have several swallowtail sponsors, and that includes our friends over at Winter Park Veterinary Hospital, Publix, Duke Energy, Massey Services, Mitigation Marketing, JCR Consulting, and Kathy Sayre and John Corbett. So thank you so much for giving your support and helping us with Wind Beneath Our Wings. I'd also like to thank all of the staff that helped put this event together. We are grateful for those who came and spoke, those who have been on camera yesterday and earlier today, and especially Laura, who helped with all of our videography. The center also has an advisory board, and these members are very important to the success of the Center for Birds of Prey. They help guide us in our outreach in our communities, helping build partnerships and fundraising for the center. So we thank you, and I hope some of our board members have joined us tonight. So I'd like to kick it over to Julie Wraithmail, and she's our Executive Director for Audubon, Florida, to say a few words before our keynote tonight. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to this evening.
Thank you, Katie. Like Katie said, I'm Julie Raithmel, Executive Director for Audubon, Florida, and I'm thrilled to be able to be here with you all tonight for the grand finale of the Center for Birds of Prey's Wind Beneath Our Wings event. Each year, we come together to appreciate and celebrate the amazing accomplishments of the Audubon team at the center and the hard and compassionate work that they do every day, rehabilitating raptors and returning them to the Florida skies, while enlisting Floridians in the conservation of these species and their habitat in the wild. To Katie and her hardworking team, Sam, Beth, Laura, Sean Lee, Kristen, Dawn, Tabby, and David, plus the center's interns and dedicated volunteers, thank you from all of us for all you do for Florida and its birds. And to all of you joining us tonight to support the center, thank you for your generosity in making this work possible each and every day. Tonight, you are all in for a treat. One of my very favorite speakers on Wild Florida, Audubon's very own Dr. Paul Gray. Last year, Paul received National Audubon Society's highest staff honor, the Charles Callison Award, for his contributions to conservation, but it came as no surprise to anyone who knows him. Paul moves fluidly from testifying at a podium to driving an airboat to slogging barefoot and gleefully through the wetlands of Central Florida. He makes mountains of dense hydrologic data accessible and even elegant for audiences ranging from decision makers to ranchers. His humility, eloquence, intellect, and world-class subject matter expertise make him the embodiment of what Audubon should be to conservation, a source of pragmatic solutions grounded in strong science to build constituencies for birds in our environment. Paul's career has been and continues to be an active devotion to birds, Lake Okeechobee, Central Florida's prairies and floodplains, and the Greater Everglades ecosystem. And I'm so excited that you all get to share in his enthusiasm for this beautiful state tonight as we hear from him. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I introduce you to Dr. Paul Gray.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you for the glowing intro, Julie. Those are a little bit embarrassing, but anyway, thank you so much for having me and for everybody showing up tonight. I really appreciate you being here. I'm Paul Gray. I work for our Audubon Everglades program. And so, well, let me just get going here. Let's see, my screen's not advancing. There it is. Okay, so if you've ever seen any of my talks, I always have to start with a picture of what I looked like in 1938. This is Marvin Chandler. He's the very first warden on Lake Okeechobee. Audubon's been on Okeechobee since 1936, which means we're in our 86th year of this program. And you notice Marvin has two belt buckles. One of them is actually a badge. And this was back when there wasn't a very big FWC and we didn't have wildlife officers. And so Audubon would hire people, the state and feds would deputize him. And he was actually a warden and enforced game laws. In this photo, they were on Okeechobee photographing glossy ibises. And at that time, about 95% of the glossy ibises in North America were nesting on Lake Okeechobee in one colony of about 1,500 birds. And anyway, they were coming back. They couldn't get around this snake. And so they ended up killing it. It is a water moccasin. It was 5 foot 11 inches long. And in its stomach, it had a glossy ibis egg. It had 3 tricolored heron eggs. It had a digested egg that they couldn't tell what it was. It had a baby American egret and an adult glossy ibis. So if you find water moccasins, they're fun to play with. Okay, so when Katie asked me if I'd be interested in giving this talk tonight, I was thinking, well, I guess I could, but I work on Everglades. And if you work on Everglades, you know, I'm an ecologist and we work on Everglades restoration where we're building reservoirs and filter marshes and we're arguing about lake levels in Okeechobee and if we should dump water, if we should hold water and who gets the water and who doesn't get water, and about nutrients in the water and how we manage agriculture and cities to try to reduce their drainage. And so it's a lot of, you know, it's like, I don't really work on raptors, but Audubon also has this phrase that's called birds tell us. And when I first heard that, I was like, tell us what? It's like, that's incomplete. But really all that work I do is for birds and they do tell us. If they're doing well, they tell us we're doing well. And if they're not doing well, they tell us we need to do more. So I picked free birds, and actually you've already heard about two of them. So maybe they're talking to more people than just me. And I'm going to talk about what they tell me about my work and our Everglades work and our greater Florida Audubon work in general. And so the three birds are going to be the Everglade Snail Kite, Audubon's crested Caracara, and the swallowtail kite. So I'll go through them one by one. So here's the snail kite. As was already mentioned, they only eat snails. Here's the apple snail, and they've got that very hooked bill to be able to dig the snail out of the shell. And they have these really long toenails and claws to try to hold this round snail in the air, and that's all they eat. They don't do well on anything else. And so I've been with Audubon this week. Last week was my 27th anniversary. And so around the year 2000, snail kites were doing pretty good in the Everglades. We had 3,000 or so. And then boom, we had this huge population crash. And they dropped about 75% in 10 years. And this just scared the heck out of everybody. And the agencies were scrambling, and they're like, what are we going to do? You know, because the kites are telling us something's wrong. And so one of my colleagues at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers called me, and she said, can I form a committee that would get all the kite people in one room and try to discuss, you know, what's going on? Because what had happened is the Corps was asking people what was wrong, and they were getting different answers. And some of the researchers were saying, oh, those other people don't know what they're talking about, and we do. And so they just wanted to have a forum where we could get everybody together. I told Gina, I said, well, you know, I work for Audubon. I can't tell people to work for the state and the feds and universities to show up at a meeting of mine. And so she said, well, actually, I fund almost all those people. So I'm going to tell them if you call a meeting, they're going to go to it. And I'm like, well, okay, but I don't even know if I have the skill sets to really mediate this argument. And so she found a person, Dr. Stephanie Romagnoch, who works for the USGS. And here's Stephanie. And she not only is an ecologist, but she's also had training in moderating meetings and stuff. And so we agreed to be co-chairs of this kite committee. And so here's a meeting of our committee, and we're doing an exercise to try to figure out why did the kites crash and what are our theories and all that stuff. And the meeting started out pretty tense, but they ended up getting really good and really collegial. And actually they're really fun to go to now, because we get all the people who are working on snails and kites and management and all these different things in the room, and we all talk kites. And in most scientific meetings you go to, they have a 15-minute talk, then another one, then another one, then another one. And Stephanie and I learned you have to give a 15-minute talk and then 15 minutes for discussion, because people just want to talk kites. So this is something that's been really good and useful for snail kites. And we've had this committee going for about 10 years. I'm having a little bit of trouble moving this along. Oh, there we are. Okay. So what else happened at that time is an exotic apple snail got loose in Florida. And here is the exotic. Here's a quarter. The native snails are about a golf ball size. These guys are about a tennis ball size. And oddly enough, these big snails lay little teeny eggs, and they lay 500 to 1,000. And our native snails lay larger eggs, and they only lay about 30 to 50. And so these guys are way more prolific, and they just exploded across Florida. And it turns out kites can actually use them. Here they are, just all these clusters and all these snails. And so kites started keying in on these exotic apple snails. And what happened is, from this very low population here, they started climbing. And so the kites were telling us this exotic snail is working for them. And so that's good. We're really happy. But in spite of this overall long-term increase, look at what happened between 2019 and 2020. They dropped by hundreds of birds, maybe a 20% drop. And so this was partly caused by a big drought that we had regionally across South Florida. And so one of the things this tells us is, okay, we've got an exotic snail that seems to work pretty well, but it's still not necessarily the answer, because we are having these possibilities of population declines. So that's one thing that the kites are still telling us, that we've got to figure some stuff out. And this impossible graph, I'm sorry, this is the percent of where kites nested in this system. Here's Everglades, Kissimmee River Valley, Okeechobee, STAs. And notice back in the 90s, most of the snail kites nested in the Everglades, because after all, they're the Everglade kite. And here's the drought of 2001, and they didn't nest at all because it was dry. And notice how over time, kites don't nest in the Everglades anymore. So they're telling us something there too. And what it is the native snails have not recovered in the Everglades, and the exotics have not been able to invade the Everglades very well, probably because of nutrient problems. And so even though the kite population has gone back up, we're not out of the woods because for some reason the Everglades aren't working. And if the Everglades don't work for the Everglade kite, then that's something that all of us need to work on. And then another thing that's going on, this is lake levels in Okeechobee. And the simple thing about this graph is basically we want the lake never to go above this red line and never to go below it. But you notice here it is. Here's Hurricane Wilma. We're way above it. And that wipes out a lot of kite habitat because the plants get drowned. And then we were drawing down the lake. And the next dry season, it didn't go up very high. And then it dropped all the way down to 9 feet. And this dotted line is where we start rationing water. And this is when the lake gets this low, kites can't use it. And part of the reason the lake gets so high and so low is because in the watershed of the lake, we've drained it very heavily. And when you put in drainage ditches, in the good old days, water would fall and it'd spread across the landscape and it would take months to get to the lake because there was no direct path. It just kind of went through these broad, shallow sloughs. You put in a drainage ditch, it's like putting in a superhighway. The water goes very, very quickly and it gets into the lake. And so when it rains, you get a big glug of water. And then as soon as it stops raining, all the water in the watershed is already in the lake and there's no base flow going into the lake. And so when you get to the dry season, there's no water replenishing the lake and it drops extra fast. So these ups and downs, which are really bad for kites, are because of drainage, and we got to go fix that drainage that's up in the watershed. And so here's part of the consequences. And I'm sorry, this is a disembodied map of Lake Okeechobee, but this is an area on Indian Prairie last year that all these are kite nests and they're all in the water. And here the same kite nests 15 days later, and notice they're drying out. And here are the same kite nests 15 days later, and they're virtually all dry. So Lake Okeechobee last spring dropped really, really fast, and all these kite nests dried out. And then here's what happened is when we got into May, if I know this is complicated, but if you look at this line, anything below this line means lake's dropping really, really fast. And when it was dropping really, really fast, we got a 91% failure of those last nests. And so kites are telling us, guys, Lake Okeechobee goes down too fast for us to be successful. And that year, we only got 33 successful nests out of more than 50 nests. So they're telling us, okay, we're trying to use the lake, but it doesn't work right for us. You've got to fix this. And so the problem of the drainage is up in this watershed. And we'll talk about this watershed. And when we do, we're going to talk about the Caracara and what it tells us about the watershed. And so the watershed is huge. We have a lot of room to work, but we also have a lot of work to do. Okay, so one of the things I didn't warn you about is this talk has pop quizzes. And so I'm going to pause for a minute and we're all going to take a quiz. And so I think it was Deb Siegel up in Alachua, Audubon asked me if I knew about the snail kite poem. And I was like, what? And she said, there's a snail kite poem. And so she sent it to me. And this is by Frank Ash. And I don't know Mr. Ash, and my apologies, I had to shorten it. But here goes the poem. 2 baby snail kites sitting in their nest, hungry and endangered, hoping for the best. Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. How about some meat? So sorry, little ones. Snails are what we eat. Apple snails for dinner, apple snails for lunch, and every Sunday morning, apple snails for president, or fun, or dietary restrictions, or brunch. So everybody has to guess at what that is. And while we're tallying the poll, I remind you that we are having the contest to name the kite in the at CBOP. And like all good elections, whoever donates the most money is going to win and get to name the kite. So please donate if you can. And we'll give this a second to finish up. Okay, I think the quote is kind of in. Yes, apple snails for dinner, apple snails for lunch, and every Sunday morning, apple snails for brunch. Most people got that right, so thank you. Okay. So now we're up in the Kissimmee watershed. And this is a picture of the Kissimmee Prairie Preserve. And this is native cover. It's never been plowed. It's not drained. You don't see big drainage ditches out here. And this is how Florida how the Okeechobee watershed used to be. And so in the summertime, when the rain comes, this big wetland out here would fill up with water. And then by the end of summer, these palmetto flats out here also would have water, and it'd be up to your ankles. And it still is on the preserve because it still has that natural hydrology. And this water would very slowly make it to this pond and then very slowly make it down. This is the Kissimmee River down here. And it would take months for this to drain out. And so when a big rain event would happen, it wouldn't all just be in Okeechobee the next week. It would take a long time. And you know, even in January and February, there'd still be water flowing out of here toward the lake to keep it from dropping too quickly. So this is the good old days. But if you look at human habitats, you know, we all live here now. And when water lands in these places, we don't leave it there for 6 months or even 1 month. We want to get rid of it within a few days. And so this drainage is what starts the water cascading toward Lake Okeechobee to create that really high water event. And then during the winter, there's no water left in here, so it helps create those low water events. So this is one thing the birds are telling us, is this watershed doesn't work like it used to. And here's just this is the map of the drainage system. These are major canals and structures. And so this watershed has been very efficiently drained. You can see from space, you know, here's the Everglades agricultural area. This is improved pasture, which is still grassland, but it's drained. And this is a citrus grove going in, and this is mostly native. This is Avon Park and Kissimmee Prairie, but you know, you can see these big alterations in our watershed. And so how do we deal with these alterations? And the one who's going to tell us about this is the Caracara. So before habitat loss was the main threat to caracaras, a lot of it was just people shooting them and egg collectors. And so this is a picture of Rod Chandler. He's the nephew of Marvin, the guy I showed in the first slide, and he's looking up this tree. What nests in cabbage palm trees? Caracaras. And this was actually a caracara nesting tree. And the spikes we think were put in by a guy named Doe, who was a famous egg collector out of Gainesville. And so what the Audubon wardens learned was they'd climb up the tree and stamp the eggs property of the National Audubon Society. So Doe couldn't put them in his collection because everybody'd say, where'd you get that egg? You know, and so anyway, that's what we used to do to protect caracaras. But nowadays we have a heavily drained watershed. And so here's a picture. This is from a road near my office, and I live up in the watershed. And it's mostly ranch lands and you know, agriculture. And this road is right near my house. So I'm going to kind of use it as an example of what's going on in the watershed and what we can do. And so I drive down it all the time because it's got some ponds in it that are really good bird watching and stuff. And so I'm going by one day and there's these caracaras sitting here, and there's a red-shouldered hawk hanging out with them. And you notice the jewelry on this bird's leg? Look at that. So anyway, I have a friend, Joan Morrison, and she's on this call, and she's the one working on caracaras. And so I get a pretty good picture and I send it to her, and I'm like, Joan, can you tell me about this bird? She writes back and says, nope, because it was supposed to have 2 bands on this leg, and there were 4 different colors that were above the white band. It's like red, yellow, and green, and blue, or whatever, and it was gone. So she says, well, you got to read the silver band, which is this one. And you can see a 16 on there, but you can't see the end number. And so it took me a few months to finally get a reading on this thing. And I was able to read it and center the number. And what she told me was it was a bird that was banded at Buck Island Ranch, which is down here lower in the watershed. And that's owned by Archibald Biological Station. And it flew up to Scrub Pens Road, about 22 miles. And when I saw it, it was 2015, and she had banded it, one of her students had, in 2008, so it's 7 years old. I'm happy to tell you this Caracara, she's still up here. I still see her. She's now 12 years old, and she likes to hang out on Scrub Pens Road. So I'm going to show you something about Scrub Pens Road and why she's telling us this is a nice place for her. Okay, here it is on Google Earth. This is just 2.5 miles across here. Here's a pond down here that you drive right through the middle of, and here's kind of a wetland. And here's another wetland patch, which gets birds. And then you come down here, and here's a slough that crosses the road, and then there's another little pond. So it's this interspersion of semi-native and semi-native grasslands and some ponds. And so I drive it every week. I did a survey on it just this morning, and just see the birds that are there because it's so accessible. And I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures from Scrub Pens, because what you're seeing here is this is a cattle ranch. It's working land, but it's got a wetland, and it can have actually a ton of bird use. And it's not like this every day. This is when it's just right. We know about wetlands drying down and all the fish getting concentrated, and finally the water's shallow enough everybody can get in and slurp them up. But this little road has actually a lot of wildlife value, and especially value for birds. And of course, whistling ducks are here. And this little guy had a blue band that was from South Carolina, and it had been banded 1 month earlier than when I took this picture in July. So whistling ducks are migrating south to breed in Florida. So I don't know what that tells me. And just a lot of cool birds. We got eagles and merlins and storks and stilts, and it's just a really great place to go. And again, it's a ranch, and it's got cows, and it's got wetlands, and it's got wildlife value. And when a hurricane comes, it really floods. I mean, and this is what it used to be in the good old days. And this flood water in a pre-impact place would be just like the Kissimmee Prairie. This would take a month to draw down. But nowadays it draws down in just a few days because we have all these drainage ditches running out of here. But while it's there, you can see we get lots of bird use. And wading birds can come in from miles around. This was after a tropical storm that we really got hammered in our neighborhood, and these birds just showed up. It's the old, if you build it, they will come. And so one of the things that we're doing in Everglades restoration is we're trying to fight that over drainage effect. And we spend a lot of money to build big reservoirs to try to catch water when it's wet. So the, Lake Okeechobee doesn't get too deep, or the Everglades doesn't get too deep. And then when it's dry, they can meter the water out. And those things work, but they're very expensive, and they're kind of nuisance features. And we're drilling wells where we can inject water in the ground and bring it back up. And again, that kind of works. But one of the things we want to do is more natural solutions to our water management problems. And so this is a project over in the Indian River Lagoon, and they went in and plugged these ditches. And so when it rains, this water just sits here. It doesn't go anywhere. It's percolating. It's going to flow in. It's not going to be in the receiving water body tomorrow. It's going to spend months trying to get there. And so not only this helps our watershed and everybody downstream of it, but it also helps create bird habitat. And so I kind of strayed away from caracaras there for a minute, but how this also helps caracaras is Christina Evans took this picture. She's a very gifted photographer, and she's on our Friends of Kissimmee Prairie. But notice this logo that she made for our Friends of Kissimmee Prairie. It's one of the silhouettes of the Caracara photos she took. And I got to say this careful because Joan's on the phone. I saw her log in. But look at how this bird's walking. It's got long legs. It's got a long neck. Caracaras are weird among raptors, as they really can walk around a lot. And one thing she told me is they will walk around ponds. They don't necessarily fly, and they pick up frogs and snakes and crawdads or whatever they find. And so when we restore these wetlands and we maintain these open grasslands and savannas on these ranches and try to, while we're helping to make the landowner part of the solution and not part of the problem, and we're trying to give them money to help us manage water, we're also creating a future that caracaras can live in. And it's kind of funny that if we can keep the watershed like it is, we're going to sustain caracaras. And if we can't, we're going to lose them. And so the caracaras are telling us, if you make this watershed good for us, it's going to have good things for people too, both for water management, for water quality, for habitat. And so again, it's something that birds tell us. Okay, so here's our second pop quiz. And this gets back to Christina Evans taking fabulous photos again. So what are these caracaras doing? Is this a territorial display? Are they begging for food? Are they dust bathing? Or are they waking up the old folks? And while we do this, a reminder that, there is a $10,000 match. So anything that you can afford to donate tonight, whether it's a large amount or a small amount, it'll be doubled, and it'll double your impact. So give it a few more seconds. There's still more people coming in. We got 107 responses, 110. Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and close the poll. Most people got it right. Dust bathing is what it looks like to us. And again, you see these little baby caracaras looking at mom and dad going, what are you doing? And of course, they're in the road. So, Anyway, and Christina got this in a magazine. They did a whole spread with her photos. They were so good. Caracaras are just fun birds, and they're just so goofy. And Jonas says the babies are goofy. I don't know if you agree. Anyway. Okay, so the last bird that tells me something about what's going on is just too easy. Everybody knows what this is, a swallowtail kite. And so I'll talk to you about what it tells me. What are these? These are swallowtail kites, every single one of them. And this picture is just kind of surrealistic. It's terrible, but I kind of like the effect. But you clarify it and look at this Christmas tree of kites. So this is in Cowbone Marsh, and it's down in Fish Eating Creek. It's on the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Fish Eating Creek Wildlife Management Area, and they're very protective of this roost, because what happens is in the summer, in July and August, several thousand kites get in here, and what they're doing is they're staging before they fly to South America for the winter. And we think this may be half of all the swallowtail kites that nest in North America. So one thing you know right away, what it tells us is this is a really important spot. And it's so important that we had an issue a few years ago where there was some litigation going on over water management in it. And Audubon intervened in the lawsuit and let me testify. And it cost us a lot of money and effort, but it's because these guys have told us this is a really, really important spot for swallowtail kites in North America. And part of the reason it's so important is because when birds cross the ocean or make their long migratory flights, they're not like us. They're way physiologically superior to us. They can put on fat really fast. A songbird can double their body weight in just a couple of weeks. These guys probably put on like half their body weight in a couple of weeks. And they can burn that fat while they fly across the ocean. And we can't do that. We can't burn while we're exercising, but they can burn their fat. They can lose, a third of their body weight in a few days as they fly across the ocean. And they need to do that because they got a long way to go. And we talk about wind beneath our wings. Kites are really cool because they don't get up till like 10 o'clock in the morning. And so you don't have to get up early to get out to see the roost if you can get access. This is very highly protected, but because they soar on thermals, what happens is they wait for the sun to warm up the ground, the hot air starts rising, and then they can get off the tree and they just put their wings out and they just soar around. When you go across the ocean, it doesn't warm up like the earth does because it's circulating. And so they have to flap all the way across the ocean. So it's twice as hard for them to go. And so it's really important for us to protect this spot so that they can get good and fat and make it all the way across the ocean. And here's some satellite radio tracks of kites going from Florida and going across the ocean. And now we'll look at what happened to a few of them. This one took off from Florida, caught bad headwinds, and got blown all the way over to Texas and landed actually north of where it took off. So not only do you have to have enough fuel to make the flight, but you have to have enough fuel if you get halfway across the ocean and the weather changes and you don't know what the weather's going to be. You've got to make that too. And here's another kite that was coming back north, and it took off on March 1st. It caught headwinds. It landed in Cuba on March 4th. It'd been in the air for 3 days. It warmed up again and it took off again. It's trying to get to Miami, got blown all the way to New Orleans. And so then it worked its way around and it finally made it to Miami. Again, it's really hard for these guys to get across the ocean. They're at the mercy of the weather and they got to get really fat. And here's another kite that took off and on March 8th, and by March 11th, it had hit headwinds and it couldn't make progress. It looped back around and almost made it to the Yucatan. It could have landed, but it looped back north and they lost its location. So it probably ran out of gas. They last about 4 days. So this is something that, when you're a migratory area like Florida is, your responsibility to get these guys fat is really big. And so all these little beauties, these are neotropical migrants. They're all going or coming from South America. They're the ones that double their body weight. All these guys are banded on Lake Okeechobee by Tyler. And all these guys too. And so most of these are bug eaters. And if they get to Okeechobee and they find conditions like this, and these are midges, the locals call them chizzywinks, but if a bug eating bird gets here and looks at this, they can it's a smorgasbord and they can eat like crazy. And so if Florida can have these bug healthy environments and have all kinds of productivity, we can get these guys across the ocean. And we like birds because they're pretty and they sing and all that kind of stuff. But there's practical reasons why we want these guys to get across the ocean. They put some tents over trees in Missouri, and the trees that had the tents and the birds couldn't get to them, they were losing 25% of their leaves to things like caterpillars. And the ones next to them in the forest were only losing 13%. And it actually significantly slowed down their growth. And so a forester who lives in Pennsylvania or New Brunswick may not know it, but it matters to them if the Everglades is restored, because when their birds get here, if they don't get fat and get across the ocean, they don't come back and protect your trees. And once we started listening to birds, that's something that they told us too. And this is something that early ornithologists figured out a long time ago. This is a kind of modern book, but Forbush wrote Useful Birds and Their Protection back around 1900. Chapman wrote one on the economic value of birds. This Birds in Florida, this is from the Florida Department of Agriculture. And here's one of the early versions of it, Birds in Florida, the Florida Grower Press. And here's one of the chapters, Stop Shooting Your Friends. That the agriculture people were telling them, even chicken hawks, they may take a chicken from your barnyard, but they're also eating rats and rodents that prey on your crops. And the birds are eating bugs that prey on your crops. And so birds are your friends, and you should protect them and not kill them. And so swallowtail kites are one of many, many migrants, and they tell us about the importance of Florida. And if you notice where Florida sits, not everybody migrates through Florida, but not only we're the neck of a funnel, but this huge area come through Florida, but we're the last gas station before they head out across the ocean. We're the first one before they come back. And North America has more species of migrating birds than any other continent, 550 out of about our 800. And in Europe, only about 30%. 250 species out of 800 migrate to the tropics. I mean, that's huge. And then also, a lot of these birds don't go across the ocean. They stay here in Florida. So we have to host them the whole winter, not just make them fat. And so what swallowtail kites and other migrating birds tell us is we're important to ourselves, and restoring the Everglades is great for caracaras and snail kites, but restoring the Everglades and protecting Florida is great for continents worth of birds. So here's our last quiz. What percent of North American bird species migrate? So if you weren't paying attention to that last slide, you're going like, darn it. And while I have this up and we're waiting for the tallies to come in, the other fundraising effort is, if you haven't heard me nattering on long enough, if you win the bid, I'll take you on an airboat ride out on Okeechobee. We go out on the north end of the lake and then run around, and the lake is fabulous. There's just, even when it's got problems, it has just, every trip you go on, there's just cool stuff. So whoever can win that bid will go on a boat ride. I can carry up to 4 people or 3 if they're larger people, but it's a really fun ride. So we got 122 answers, and most people picked 65%, and that is correct. That's the right answer. About 2/3 of our birds migrate. So I'm going to wrap this up, and we can do questions and stuff like that. But I guess, what I'm talking about, what I've covered here, snail kites tell me how the water body they're living in functions. How does Lake Okeechobee function? How did the Everglades function? And that function relates to what's going on in its watershed. And so they tell us the watershed's either doing well or not. And when you go to the watershed, things like caracaras can tell you this watershed is working well or it's not working as well as it should be. And so they tell us about our local conditions. And then swallowtail kites and other migrants tell us that Florida really has to be super vigilant about how well we take care of birds, because we're taking care of everybody's birds, not just our own. And once again, thank you to Christina for this beautiful photo that she took in her backyard. So I'll stop talking. And Erica, if you want to do the questions or whatever we do next.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Paul. My name is Erica. I am the communications director, and I will be emceeing the Q&A with Paul. There's a lot of us here today, so we are going to just do questions in the chat. So if you have a question for Paul in the chat, just go ahead and type that. And we have a few minutes for questions and are happy to do that. So the first one, Paul, is about sugarcane, as an agricultural commodity. How does sugarcane impact Lake O and the other water resources in the watershed in Lake Okeechobee?
Okay, yeah. So how does sugarcane impact Lake O? Most of the sugarcane is grown south of Lake Okeechobee, so it doesn't really affect the inflows or the nutrients in the lake. It does affect Lake O because the farmers want to keep the lake really deep to make sure that they have plenty of irrigation water. So that's one of the things that we constantly have discussions about because quite frankly, they want the lake so deep it harms it. But there's a new thing going on, and there's a lot of sugar being planted north of the lake now. And so that will affect the lake with nutrients. And one of the other things that sugar planting does is back to our caracaras. There are tens of thousands of acres of sugar that have been put in, which used to be cattle land. And it's not good for caracaras. And so that's a plant that increasingly is concerning us, that if we go to mass scale sugar production or other large grasses like that, that it's going to be bad for the watershed and the bird life overall.
Paul, I know you're an Everglades expert, but you also know a lot about caracaras. Do you know where the highest concentrations of crested caracaras are?
Yeah, so I almost stuck that figure in there. Basically, the Kissimmee Valley, and then also from Okeechobee over towards Sarasota, there's a big prairie grassland area over there. So most of the birds, caracaras in the state, are kind of between Orlando, Okeechobee, and the West Coast, although they are in other areas. And, John James Audubon, when he shot his caracara that he drew for the birds in North America, he shot that at the Bulow plantation up near St. Augustine. So they used to have a wider range. And if we manage our landscapes well, we might be able to expand it some more.
Here's a good question. Wetlands are critically important, not only in Lake Okeechobee, but across Florida. What can we do to protect our wetlands from development?
The first thing you have to do is protect your wetlands from development. And, there's a lot of development going in. And so we have to try to follow the developments to the extent we can. Sometimes we argue that this development will hurt wetlands or hurt birds, but one of the other arguments is don't put people's homes in low places, because when the hurricane comes, they're going to get flooded. And so again, protecting wetlands protects people and wildlife and our water resources. So those are just kind of some of the arguments that we have to have in our arsenal and be ready for it. And it's there's more developers than you can shake a stick at right now, so it's hard to keep up, but we have to demand that our agencies protect our wetlands.
Going a completely different direction, what other birds are competing for the apple snails? Limpkins, any other species?
Yeah, limpkins are apple snail specialists, so they also have responded very positively to the exotic snail, and then they've increased. But the list of things that eat apple snails is actually really, really long. When they're small, they're pretty crunchy and good. And so raccoons and other kinds of mammals will eat them. There's a fish called a shellcracker that actually specializes in eating snails. Alligators eat them. Just all kinds of things will eat them when they're smaller. So and again, the exotic snail, we're still not sure its total ecological impacts. It has helped many things, but it also eats the plant community, and we've had some eat outs in some places where they denuded the community. So the jury's still kind of out on their total impact.
All right, we have time for one more. So Paul, I'm going to go far afield on this one. As some people know, if you watch the news, there are plans to genetically modify mosquito populations. Do you think that might have an effect on our birds?
Yes. That's a hard one because mosquitoes do cause a lot of human health and suffering. But like there's a thing called a mosquito fish, and it goes around eating mosquito larvae in ponds, and they're actually very, very effective. when you have standing water for a long period of time, you get a population of mosquito fish. You really don't get many mosquitoes out of those wetlands. So in some cases, trying to eliminate certain mosquitoes that cause human plagues that really kill a lot of people, I can understand that, but just killing a mosquito because it's a mosquito, I think is a mistake. And we should be very selective in how we try to apply those types of technologies.
All right, Paul, I'm going to close out the Q&A by asking my personal favorite question. What today, because I know the answer changes depending on the season, what is your favorite bird, Paul, today, if you had to choose one?
Well, for today, actually, I have a million, but my favorite bird is the green-winged teal, because I just got a little black Labrador retriever. He's 9 weeks old, and his name is Caracara, which is the species name for green-winged teal. So that's my favorite.
And I can tell you all from looking at photos, that is a absolutely adorable puppy. So thank you so much, Paul. We always learn so much from you. We really appreciate your time. For everyone on this recording, we will send you the link to the recording. So if there's something you missed, you can go back and check it out. We will also send you the recordings for the other 2 events. So Katie, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Thank you, Paul. What a great night. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing a little bit about what birds tell us. So, of course, he talked about some of my favorite birds. Today, it would be the swallowtail kite, because I just saw my first one back in Central Florida this week. So that's always an exciting thing to be able to do. And we just encourage everybody to go out and learn a little bit more about what you can do to help our birds in protecting important habitats. We invite you to come visit the center. We are open, and just check out our website. We hope that you will come by and see directly what your dollars at work are doing in helping the birds that reside at our facility and how we make an impact statewide. So again, we are trying to reach our fundraising goal of $90,000 from yesterday and today, and we hope that you will give us a donation to help support our work here in Florida. We really appreciate it. And as Paul shared a little bit with us, we also have an auction going on. So take advantage of that. And it will be open until 9 p.m. tonight. So you can bid against your friends, your coworkers that you need to one-up them and win that the naming of our snail kite, or win a trip with Paul on Lake O, a bald eagle release, a trip to Corkscrew. Some of our theme parks are offering up tickets. So we just ask you to take a look at our auction link and enjoy yourself, and we hope you'll be involved. That is it for this evening. And we just want to say you all on this call are the wind beneath our wings. And we really appreciate it and hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful evening.
Hi, my name is Doug Pitts. I'm an Audubon board member, and I'm standing here at the Bird of Prey Center in front of some of the aviaries that have been constructed for displays for the public to see the great work that's done here at the center, where they're actually rehabbing some of these raptors in our area. And I was fortunate enough today to actually be on a release of an eagle that was rehabbed here since September. I've been fortunate enough to have been involved here since the early 2000s. And it's been a very, very rewarding part of my life to see the work that's actually done here. And I would encourage anyone to come to this facility and experience the care and the love the staff have for the animals that are brought here to be rehabilitated. hopefully you'll be as touched as I am on what happens here, and we would really value your support.